Can you please make sure you have your hands free? What I would like you to do is imitate my movements, but please don't speak yet. Okay? So we're just doing the movements together. Are you ready?
Yes.
Here we go. 6 months a year worldwide to work with teachers. Wherever in the world I go, whatever I talk about, I always find a little excuse to use this activity, okay? And because it was so beautiful, can we do it again, please? But this time, what I want you to do is, I want you to do the movements with me. This time, I want you to speak along, okay? So here we go. From the box. Okay, here we go. The question is, do we want this? Okay, so what do I mean by do we want this? As I said, this is not about teaching, but it's about children. The question is, what kind of route do we want to take in education? Well, this is just one example. We have seen children watching television here. And actually what they're doing is they are watching television passively. They're being entertained, okay? We need to know that when you look into the latest research about children and children's brains, of course, young children are already able to attend, they are able to think, they're able to remember, but, and this is a key point, their thinking system, their brain, is a very reactive one. In other words, they adapt more or less to the kind of sensory environment they grow up in. I travel about 6 months every year. I go to many, many countries. I've actually been to 53 countries around the world to work with teachers. I go to many countries in Latin America, in Europe, in Asia. And when I talk to teachers, also outside of the seminars, I often hear one of the biggest challenges we have with the teaching of young learners is to get them to focus their attention, to sit still and listen and work in a focused way for a longer period of time. Maybe this is not such an issue for you and your learners, I don't know, because this is my second time in the Ukraine, and the first time I was here for 4 hours or 5 hours only, so now it's 3 days, okay? Children's brain is very reactive, okay? So television is just one example. I'm not against television, don't get me wrong, but I am against children being in front of screens for hours and hours and hours every day. Why? Because screens usually are fast-paced, they're loud, there's lots of movement, they're colorful, they're constantly changing scenes. And this actually has an effect on the child's brain. The child adapts to that effect. In other words, if you have children in your classrooms who are those kind of reactive learners, who are used to this kind of entertainment all the time, then what we need to do as teachers is, in order to teach them 6 new words, we need to stand on our head out here in front of the class to attract their attention. Do you see what I mean? So in other words, we have to be the clown all the time. And I don't necessarily want to be the clown all the time. Although, as I've said, fun is an important element of teaching children. Tiresome for the teacher. It's exhausting. It's giving, trying to grab their attention all the time. And basically, this is teaching without the child's real participation, if you see what I mean. So I have another metaphor of where we might like to go. Sorry. Question is, or do we want this maybe? Enough maybe. So I'm putting words into your mouth. You might say, I want the attention-grabbing approach. I haven't met a lot of teachers who would say that though. I think what most teachers want is children who are gradually learning, because this is not something that works from one moment to the next. It takes who are gradually taking more and more responsibility for their own learning. Again, please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying use any of my books and your children will be different from one moment to the next. What I'm saying is that I'm an advocate for an approach where the teacher works with children in such a way that this is something that develops over time in the classroom. And I think we want, or most teachers want, cognitive tools or mental tools. This is a term created by Lev Vygotsky. Tools that help them to attend, to remember, and to think better. I will be coming back to this term. What Roma and Leon call this learning as a self-directed activity rather than learning as an attention-grabbing approach. Okay? So these are just some ideas on two possible routes in education, and I have not hidden that I'm all for the second and not the first approach. Any idea about this?
Brain cells.
Brain, absolutely, yeah. I'm currently working, I'm not a brain scientist, but I'm doing a project currently with James Zull. He's professor of neurobiology at Case Western University in Cleveland, Ohio. And he's one of the world's leading experts on learning and the brain. We're working together on a project, a book that we are writing. The title will probably be something like The Brain, Emotions, and Language Learning. Okay? Now this is these are actually 4 photos I got from him. And what this shows, I don't know how well you can see that. It says 3 months, 6 months, 15 months, and 24 months, okay? And what it shows is tiny parts. This has been enlarged 10 million times or whatever. Tiny parts of children's. I think we need a new battery maybe. Yeah, give this to you. Tiny strips from children's neocortices. The neocortex is the part of the human brain which, first of all, from an evolutionary point of view, it's the youngest part of the brain. That's why it's called neocortex, which means it's probably 3 or 4 million years old in terms of evolution of the brain. So young in brain terms means a few million years. The second thing about the neocortex is it's the skin over the brain. It's what's sometimes also called the gray matter, okay? It's 3 to 4, 5 millimeters thick, and it's the seat of all kinds of higher cognitive thinking capabilities. So decision making, rational thinking, logical thinking, understanding grammar, to give a linguistic example, etc., etc. That's all governed by the neocortex. Now, what we can see here, actually, when you look at this, is at first sight, what you see is there's some change going on here, right? You can see that there's less of this bush kind of thing. Then here, we have more bushes here. They look a bit like the weeds we have in our back gardens. Actually, they are so-called neuronal networks. And what we can also see is those little dots. Can you see them, the dark dots? They are the neurons or the nerve cells. And those of you who have read a bit about the human brain will know that we have the so-called synapses, those docking stations, and they help to create those neuronal networks, basically, which are extremely important because the better our children are able to develop networks, neuronal networks, the more they will remember. There is basically a new neuronal network for every single word we remember, and the more they will be able to think. So the brain is a fascinating system. Now, what is key for us is, you know, and this is where I'm coming back to what I said at the beginning of this session. The question is, what makes those networks grow? Well, it's relatively easy. There's one reason for the growth we can see here, and that reason is learning. If there was no learning, there would be no neuronal growth. And actually, so learning from a brain point of view, from a neurological point of view, is actually a physical process in the human mind. Something is growing up there, okay? And the question is, what are the fertilizers, metaphorically speaking, of these bushes growing up there? And there is one reason, and that is chemicals, certain chemicals. And they are all so-called neurotransmitters, or the chemicals of emotion. So emotional engagement is so extremely important in any kind of learning. That's why I said initially also, the fun factor is a very important factor, okay? Emotional engagement, positive emotional engagement is so important because it releases in our brain chemicals such as dopamine, adrenaline, and serotonin, and those chemicals, they are responsible for this kind of neuronal growth. So this is what we are talking about when we're talking about developing thinking skills. We're talking about emotional engagement at the same time as we are talking. Thank you so much, Oli.
Okay, yeah, that's much better.
We're talking emotional engagement as much as we are talking specific thinking skills. This young gentleman here, as you can all see, is trying to do some work. He's trying to cut a wooden board in half. And it's obvious that in order to be able to cut a wooden board in half, we need a tool. We can't do that without a tool. If I asked you to drive a nail into this wall, if you tried to do that without a hammer, it would be a pretty painful process. You agree, right? So in other words, without physical tools, we'd be very limited in what we can do. If you're stuck on the motorway with a flat tire and you have no tools, you have a problem. Okay, now the same thing is true of our cognitive capabilities. We need cognitive tools or mental tools in order to make more out of what we have up there in our brain-mind system. Tools of the mind, what Robert and Leong say, extend our cognitive capabilities. Their absence will have serious long-term consequences on the child's development. So this is the key point. If a child is not learning to develop their cognitive tools, then what happens? Without them, children will not be able to pay attention. They will have poor memory skills. They will not be able to engage in abstract thinking. So it's not just that it makes our life easier if children are learning to think and to develop their capabilities to participate actively in the teaching process. It's not just about us having not a quiet life in the classroom, because it will never be quiet anyway, but, you know, being less exhausted at the end of a lesson. It's also, and it's mainly about the child, the children themselves. They need to learn to develop cognitive tools, otherwise they will not be successful academically. So, tools of the mind reduce the workload for the teacher in some ways, but the key point is they help children to develop better. They are the basic layer for the development of any kind of academic success, of course. Okay. Any idea who this is? It's not a young Herbert Pухtою, no. My hair looked a bit like him when I was young. This has changed in the meantime. No, it's a guy, I don't know if you've heard his name, Malcolm Gladwell. He is American and he writes rather interesting books, and one book that I'm referring to here is called Outliers, the Story of Success. And in this book, he looks at people from all walks of life who've been extremely successful. People like the Beatles and other musicians, people like the top Canadian and Ukrainian maybe, I don't know, ice hockey players, people such as composers, and he looks at Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, those computer whiz kids, and successful entrepreneurs, CEOs of big international companies. And he says, what is behind their success? So is there something, if we analyze the way they grew up, if we analyze the way they started their careers, are there any kind of trends, or are there any kind of patterns that are universal, so to speak? So is there any recipe for high success in life? And interestingly, he comes up with a few points, really, which are very, very different from what we usually read in biographies. In biographies, you often read, you know, a story that goes from rags to riches, okay? Somebody grows up in modest life situations and fights their way to the top. No, he comes up with other points, and I would like to briefly refer to 3 points here that he mentions. The first one, so he says, people like the Beatles and Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and what have you, all those people, they have certain cumulative advantages. Advantages that come together, okay? That somehow play together so that they could actually develop their skills to the world-class level they managed to develop them. The first one is opportunity. And opportunity I have translated into what Earl Stevick for the language class calls meaningful action, okay? What difference participation in a given activity makes to an individual relative to his or her entire range of drives and needs. In other words, if I see an opportunity, I need to grab it, because opportunities are there all the time. But if it depends on the person, right? If somebody sees an opportunity as a possible source of meaningful action or not, okay? So it's grabbing the opportunity, and for I think for the language class this would mean relevance. It's got to do with motivation and agency. That's the first one. The second cumulative advantage is actually time. And that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? If you don't have time to practice your skills, you will not achieve world-class level in your skills portfolio. That makes a lot of sense, but I was thinking when I was reading this, the Beatles? Why? And then, actually, he says that in the book too. If you might be asking yourself now, you know, how the Beatles did that. Well, they had, at the very beginning of their career, they had a contract to play at a nightclub in Hamburg, in Germany. And I think it was called the Star Club, if I'm not wrong, okay? And in that Star Club, because it was their first contract ever, they signed a completely silly contract, which was they had to play from 5 o'clock to 2 o'clock in the morning every single night for 3 or so years. Now, of course, what did that mean? That gave them a lot of opportunity to practice their skill, and they became better and better and better. This is from a study by a guy called Daniel Levitin, who looks at the relationship between time and master performance. And he says 10,000 hours, interesting, he came up with this number, 10,000 hours of practice. That's what you need in any area in life if you want to achieve world-class performance. 10,000 hours of practice is required to achieve the level of mastery associated with being a world-class expert in anything. In study after study of composers, basketball players, fiction writers, ice skaters, concert pianists, chess players, master criminals, I don't know how they studied that, and what have you, this number comes up again and again. I did the maths and I calculated how many hours a week this would mean for our English class. It's a lot of hours, I can tell you. Okay? But our students don't need to have world-class level, they need to have a good command. That's the key point. Well, and the next point is special thinking skills. And there are 3 kinds of thinking skills that he stresses. The first one is the ability to think critically. Okay? And I will look into what this actually means. The second one is divergent thinking rather than convergent thinking. Divergent thinking is thinking different from everybody else. Convergent thinking is thinking like everybody else does. Okay? And Malcolm Gladwell says the Nobel Prize winners of tomorrow are the divergent thinkers and not the convergent ones, because if I want to develop a new model in, I don't know, atom physics, and I come up with ideas that all my colleagues have had before me, I will not be the next star in the world of atom physics, okay? So we need to learn to think differently. And now this is quite interesting that top universities these days, and he actually quotes from the entry exam papers to the 2 top universities in the UK, Cambridge and Oxford. They, these days, don't test their students anymore in specific knowledge on the subject they're going to study. What they test them on as part of the tests is their ability to think divergently. And I will show you a part of the test, which is quite amazing. Maybe some of you don't even believe that, but it's a fact, okay? So students are asked so the examiner says, you've got 1 minute now, pick up pen and paper and write down as many different uses that you can think of for the following objects: a brick and a blanket. This has got nothing to do with the content of what that student is going to study, but it's got everything to do with the ability to think outside of the box. Okay? Now here is an interesting answer from one student who actually passed the test. And the student wrote, brick, to use in smash and grab raids to help hold the house together, to use in a game of Russian roulette if you want to keep fit at the same time. Bricks at 10 paces, turn and throw, no evasive action allowed. To hold the eider down on a bed, tie a brick at each corner as a breaker of empty Coca-Cola bottles. It's quite amazing, isn't it? I regard myself as a creative person. But, you know, this and the next piece in 1 minute, just coming up like that with all those strange answers, that is quite creative. Here we have the answer for blanket, to use on a bed, as a cover for illicit, we have a girl here, in the woods, as a tent to make smoke signals with, as a sail for a boat, cart or sled, sorry, typo, as a substitute for a towel, as a target for shooting practice, for short-sighted people like Gerbertom Pухtою, as a thing to catch people jumping out of burning skyscrapers. Wow! And here is somebody who failed the test. He or she wrote brick, building things, throwing blanket, keeping warm, smothering fire, tying to trees, and sleeping in a hammock, improvised stretcher. Failed. Interestingly, when they compared the students' exam results, their marks in their certificates from the previous school, from their A levels, this person had slightly better results than the other person. Both were top, but this person had slightly better results. Okay, so we're talking critical thinking, divergent thinking rather than convergent thinking. We're talking something that somehow hangs together with this thinking outside the box, lateral thinking and creativity. Now I've been thinking, what could we do with this for the foreign language class? And I would like to suggest 3 points here. If we're talking cumulative advantage for our young learners through cognitive development, the first one is critical thinking. Okay? The second one is something that might be a little bit surprising now, value-based teaching. But my thinking is this. Children who learn to be extremely intelligent become people who are extremely intelligent. And somebody who is extremely intelligent needs values. Because if they don't have values, they become criminals. Do you know what I mean? I mean, this world is so full of problems. This world is so full of all kinds of conflicts all over the world, okay? And we need people who do what they do, and we need leaders who do what they do based on human values. So I believe that if we teach children, we teach them thinking, we also need to teach them values. And we need to teach them creativity, and what's important, I believe, here is ownership. I will be talking about this in a few minutes. Let's start with thinking and critical thinking. First of all, you've noticed I put this within brackets. Why? Well, because I think when it comes to the development of thinking skills, we first of all need to develop basic thinking skills. And then we can develop critical thinking skills, okay? We can't start with critical thinking skills, but this might not mean anything yet, because I have not defined yet what I mean by critical thinking skills, okay? So I will do that in a few minutes. But first of all, why should we teach thinking? Hope you don't mind. It's getting a bit warm. I'm looking for a door handle. Because we don't know what tomorrow's world will be like. We only know one thing about tomorrow's world. It'll be different from today's world. In what ways it'll be different, we have no idea. People who professionally predict the future always go wrong. But we know the world will be different, so children will need skills in order to face the challenges that an unpredictable world is actually offering. So they need problem-solving skills, they need decision-making skills, and they need to be able to meet unexpected problems and tackle them. School curricula, when you look at the preambles of school curricula, when you read school curricula, they are often based off a fallacy of error-free learning, okay? We know that in real life, learning requires error. It's impossible to learn without making errors. And in real life, we need much more than just the assimilation of facts. And we need more than to wait for the one right answer, because very often there is not one right answer. Very often there are many different kinds of possible answers. So in fact, we want our children to develop thinking skills that make it possible for them to come up with alternatives, to think outside of the box, as I said previously, so they become flexible and dynamic as learners. Well, this is what critical thinking is all about. Working out, let me give you just one moment. I'm just checking. When you think of a traditional language class, especially with beginners and children, thinking is not always in the focus of what's going on in the teaching and learning process. And I would like to give you a little example, or a few little examples. Imagine a teacher working with a beginners group of children, okay? The teacher wanting to practice colors, teacher introduces the colors, and then the teacher says, what color is my tie? And the children say, your tie is blue. And then the teacher says, what color is my shirt? Your shirt's pink. What color are my trousers, etc., etc., etc. Well, this does not require a lot of thinking, right? Because it's pretty obvious. And in fact, it's something where, as teachers, we only get answers because we are in the classroom and because we are the teacher. You can try that out. After this session, go out into the streets and say to somebody in Ukrainian, excuse me, what color is my blouse? They will not say green or blue or red or brown. They will probably call the police or the ambulance or the fire brigade, or they will give you a rather impolite answer. Or we are practicing the present progressive, right? What am I doing now? You are sitting down. What am I doing now? You're standing up. What am I doing now? You're walking up and down. Now again, this is not how we use language in real life. Do you agree? And again, it doesn't require a lot of thinking. I travel 6 months a year, speak English all the time basically. Nobody has ever said to me, what am I doing now? You see what I mean? And of course, you know, prepositions is my favorite, right? We stand in front of the children and we want to practice prepositions, okay? And we say, where's the bottle? It's on your head. Where's the bottle? It's behind you. Where's the bottle? It's next to you, etc., etc., etc. Of course, nobody talks like that in real life. You might say, well, hang on a minute. Beginners, we need to practice that simple language, don't we? Yes, absolutely, I agree with you. I completely agree with you. But what I'm saying is, we need to be, and when I say we, I include myself as a developer of materials, we need to be a little bit more creative ourselves to come up with activities that require thinking. Because if there is no thinking involved, there's no emotional engagement, and then we don't have what I said previously. Neuronal networks are not growing from saying, where's the bottle? There's no neuronal network that is growing for this that I can use in real life, because in real life nobody talks like that. So we're creating blueprints of L2 interaction in our classrooms that can't be used out there. So, how do we do that? That's the big question. How can we actually engage our students in meaningful, cognitively meaningful activities, while at the same time practicing simple language, because it's always easier when we're talking advanced levels, isn't it? Okay? In the advanced levels, level class, teachers don't normally say, where's the remote control? Okay? Now, this is a book that I have written with Marianne Williams. We published it 2 years ago. It's called Teaching Young Learners to Think. It's not a course book, it's a book for teachers. It's a resource book. And in developing this resource book, we looked at various thinking programs, because there are a number of thinking programs in many countries around the world. BLAGS, Somerset school program, Foyer Science, Instrumental Thinking, etc., etc., etc. But none of them was developed for developing thinking skills in the foreign language class, okay? So we looked at what they are doing, and we looked at the categories there, and we came up with a set of 13, if I'm not wrong, categories that can be used in the young learners classroom up to an age of 12, 13, even 14. Where if we work on them, we are developing language skills and thinking skills at the same time. So here we have some simple ones: comparisons, categorizing, sequencing, focusing, attention, memorizing, exploring space, time, numbers. And here these are already kind of like higher order thinking or partly also critical thinking skills. Creating associations, understanding the relationship between cause and effect, and last but not least, making decisions, okay? When you look at them, what's interesting is that these are basic thinking skills, but any kind of higher order thinking, any critical thinking skill, depends on the development of these basic ones. And I can give you a few examples. If a child is not able to focus their attention, they will not be able to think logically and critically. You getting that? Okay. I'll give you another example. Let's imagine I want to buy myself a new laptop. Okay. That's something that many of us have to do. And in order to buy a new laptop, I'm going to a shop or I go online. The problem is, when I go to the shop, when I go online, I don't see one laptop, I see 40 or 50 or 60 models. I need to make an intelligent decision. And that's a higher order thinking skill. But how can I make an intelligent decision? Well, first of all, I need to look at the different models. So I'm looking at a model over here, and I'm thinking, well, the RAM space, the size, the weight, the price, the keyboard. For me, it's always important to have a good keyboard, okay? And I'm looking at how many USB ports it has. I'm looking at this, I'm looking at that. Now, in order to make a decision, I need to compare. I need comparison skills. So I'm going over there, I'm looking at a different model. I've forgotten all the facts about that model. So I do not only need to compare, I also need to be able to remember what I have looked at there. So you see how the basic thinking skills actually go together, because otherwise I go into a shop, I want to buy a laptop, I buy the pink one or the one with a pear on it or whatever, I can't make an intelligent decision. So any kind of basic thinking skills that we develop with our children is a precondition for the development of several higher order critical thinking skills, okay? Let's look at a few examples. I don't know how well you can see that. I will give you a description of this. This is from our book, Teaching Young Learners to Think. And what we have here is, it looks like a very traditional worksheet. And this is actually about prepositions, remember? Where is the microphone? Now, here we have a boy, his name is Tom. Can you see what this is? A tower. This says, for those of you sitting back there, this says toy shop. This says park, and here we have hotel. Okay? So tower, toy shop, park, hotel. Now it looks like a very traditional worksheet, but it's not, as you will see. It says, look at the picture of Tom, right in front of him, behind him, on his right, and on his left, in the blanks. And I would like you to call out loudly and quickly the solutions, okay? The tower is behind. Excellent. The hotel is on the right. Somebody said left. Thank you for kindly imitating what children would say. Because of course they don't know, they have to put themselves into Tom's shoes, right? Okay, the shop is on his left, the park is... Okay, here we go. Tom now turns right, finish the sentences. The tower is on his right. Left, right, left, right. Look, we are a group of trained adult thinkers. But we still can't answer this without thinking. Do you agree with me? So it's the same principle as if I'm saying to my students, where's the bottle? But it's not. But it's not because it requires thinking. So we have a simple cognitive, a simple linguistic activity that can be done with beginners, but at the same time it's cognitively more engaging. So it also is emotionally more engaging because children need challenges, and hence think of the human brain. The hotel is? Okay, so they have to imagine, right? They have to imagine that Tom turns right. So now the tower is on his right, the hotel is in front of him, the shop is behind him, the park is on his left. Okay? This becomes a little bit more complicated even. I'm not going to go into this. So what are children learning here apart from important language? They're learning how to explore space. And why is that important? Well, first of all, children need a reference system to understand the world they're living in, to understand the space they're living in. They need to know or have a sense of position, distance, direction, proximity, dimensions, etc., etc. Those are the basic thinking skills. But at the same time, we are talking, this is a very, very important academic thinking skill. And it's exactly the same kind of thinking process. And if a child learns that when they are young, they're much better off. Why? The ability to imagine a change in a position, like the child thinks, well, if Tom now turns right, okay? This ability is necessary for hypothetical thinking and the ability to imagine another viewpoint. Let's imagine I am a biologist or a scientist. I'm looking at a model of the world's climate change. And I'm developing this computer program which is all about what happens if the temperature goes up by another 1 degree or 2 degrees. What happens what happens to the polar caps of the world? What happens if the water rises? All those things are exactly the same kind of about the same kind of cognitive thinking. What if? What if he turns right? What if? Hypothetical thinking. And last but not least, children who see only themselves and who have never learned to put themselves in other people's shoes, who have never learned to see the world through other people's eyes, will grow up in very egotistic ways. And when I come back to the things I said previously about the state of the world, this, I think, is a little contribution we can make to world peace, we as teachers, if we help our children to put themselves in other people's shoes, to develop the skill of empathy, to see the world through other people's eyes, etc., etc., etc. This leads to more tolerance. This leads to more understanding of other cultures. This leads to more understanding of otherness. And the world could do with more tolerance and understanding. Let me tell you a little anecdote here. Not too long ago, I was in Chile, in South America, in Santiago, and I was actually working with a group of teachers from one school. There were about 40 teachers at a school that is the most prestigious school in Santiago, Chile. I'm very proud to say they have been working with my course books for many, many years. Okay? So it must be the best school in Santiago. When I'm there and when I watch a class, when I watch the children, I always think, who's going to be the next prime minister? Because all the top people from Santiago have their children there. It's a very prestigious, expensive school. And I was working with the teachers, and I was working with them on the development of thinking skills. And then during the coffee break, one colleague comes up to me and she says, I would like to tell you something. You know, this is the most prestigious school in Santiago, but my colleagues and I, we are engaged in a community project. And I said, okay, tell me about it. And she said, well, we work at a school in our free time. We give up 3 hours a week. We teach 3 hours a week for free at a school in a very poor neighborhood of Santiago de Chile. So every teacher goes there every week and teaches 3 hours for free children from very difficult social backgrounds, children whose parents maybe even dead, children whose fathers have been, some of them have been in prison, children who've had experience with drugs, with violence, etc., etc., etc. They do that for free, and I was pretty impressed. And she said, can I ask you a question? I said, yeah. She said, I'd like to ask you if you can come there tomorrow morning, and we would like to watch you working with one of our groups there, teaching one of our groups a lesson in English. I said, yes, I can do that. And she said, but they are 14. I said, okay, no problem, I can do that. Teaching teenagers is one of my specialities. She said, but their English is very low level. I said, okay, fine, no problem. She said, but there are 120 kids in the classroom. I said, all right. Thinking, should I have said, sorry, I have no time tomorrow? And then the last thing was the talk, because she said, and what we would like you to do is, we would like you to teach them of the importance of learning English as a foreign language. So I'm thinking, oh my God, what do I do? 14-year-olds, 120 kids in the class, difficult social backgrounds, low-level English. I can't give them a lecture on the importance of learning another language, so how do I do that? And then I thought, well, I have to live my own, I have to walk my own talks. I need to get them to understand. So, because what I require from them, or what they wanted them to do, is they wanted them to understand the importance of learning English. So in other words, they need to compare. They need to compare what it's like to speak a language with somebody who doesn't. So I thought, okay, comparison. So I took this worksheet with me. It's a copy. Oleg, thank you. I took this worksheet with me. I asked them to copy one for each pair of students, so we had 60 worksheets. Yeah, thank you very much. And I went to the class, first of all, and I said, hi, do you speak English? And they said, no. I said, no is English. Then I thought I needed to do something very, very simple, and I said, I'm sure you speak good English. So give me 6 colors in English, very fast, okay? So I said, give me 6 colors, give me 6 animals in English, give me 6 foods in English, give me 6 numbers, give me 3 days of the week. So very, very simple vocabulary, brainstorming. So there were some English words floating around, okay? We had a word cloud in the classroom, so to speak. And then I handed out this worksheet, and I don't know how well you can see that. It says, look carefully, what's the same, what's different. So before I handed out the worksheet, I explained same and different. Different is the same in Spanish, diferente. The same I needed to explain, so I drew 2 squares which were the same, and then I drew 2 squares which were different, okay? So I said same, different. And then I handed out the worksheet, I explained to them size, they didn't understand. Color, they understood because it's the same in Spanish. Age, I needed to explain, etc., etc., etc. Then they looked at the worksheet, I gave them a minute, I said work with a partner and write S for the same or D for different, okay? And so I said then at the end, I don't know, you probably can't see that back there. We have 2 trees here, okay? There's a large tree, a tall tree, and there's a very short tree, and it says size, okay? So what's the correct answer for number 1? Different, size is different. What about number 2, size and color? Size different, color the same. These two cars, the size is more or less the same, the age is different, etc., etc., etc. Okay? Then, so we did through his worksheet, we went through his worksheet, everything worked fine. And then I said, okay, put your worksheet face down on your desk. Now, can you imagine we have a girl standing here? And the boys went, yes. And I said, how old is she? And they said, 16. And I said, what's her name? And they said, Cecilia, or whatever. What's her color of hair? What about her eye color? What clothes is she wearing, etc., etc., etc. So they gave me a description of Cecilia. And then I said, and here we have, and the girl said, a boy. And I said, what's his name? And they said, Mario, okay? And again, they gave me a description of 14 or 16-year-old Mario. So we had Cecilia and Mario. And then I said to them, okay, now imagine, look at Cecilia, look at Mario. What's the same? And they said, well, they are from Chile. They are 16. What's different, I said. And they said, well, she's a girl, he's a boy. Okay. I said, you know what? She speaks Spanish and English. He speaks Spanish. I said, what's different? They said, she's a girl, he's a boy. and she speaks English and Spanish, and he speaks Spanish. I said, but what's different? What's different? Silence. And then one of them said, money. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, in their very basic English, I'm not trying to imitate it because I don't want to ridicule them. In the basic English, she said, well, she speaks Spanish, she speaks English. She can get a good job. She can get good money. More difficult for Mario. And then another one said, traveling. I said, what do you mean? Well, when they want to go to another country, it's easier for Cecilia because she speaks English. And then somebody said, nonsense. And I said, why? And he said, well, if they want to go to Buenos Aires, it's no problem. Because in Buenos Aires, people speak Spanish. Etc., etc. And then other things came, like when you go on the internet, it's easier when you speak English. When you want to make friends with people from other countries, etc., 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 etc. I left the class, and I was pretty proud, actually, because it had been possible, actually, to get them to think about what difference it makes when you learn a foreign language without actually having to preach or lecture, because that would have been impossible for me anyway in that particular situation. So just a little anecdote here, okay? I'll skip this one. Some people say that KIL, you know what KIL stands for, right? Content and language integrated learning. Some people say that KIL is the future of ELT. KIL is generally basically about combining language learning with another subject. So teaching some geography through English or mathematics or biology or what have you. So you do two things at the same time. You teach language and you teach content. I believe more in actually doing KIL in such a way that we combine language learning with thinking, okay? So use some content from geography, from biology, from sciences, thanks very much. But don't go too far away. So children are more engaged, because it does not necessarily mean if I do some biological content or mathematical content or science content that my learners will be really engaged. And there are lots and lots of examples. I have often seen so-called kill lessons, which are basically about vocabulary. I went into a classroom in a Northern European school recently, and they were teaching 4 hours a week. They were 11-year-olds. 4 hours a week, 4 hours of English a week, but they had 3 lessons of biology in English on top of that. And I thought, wow, these kids will know a lot of English. And I came into the classroom and I was totally impressed because they had just learned about sharks. And on the walls of the classroom, I saw images and words for at least 50 different sharks. And I'm a scuba diver. I probably only know 5 or 6 or 7, okay? So I thought, wow. But when I tried to talk English to those kids, they were actually not very good. But they knew their 50 words for sharks. You see what I mean? And I don't think that's very meaningful. And here's a little example. This is something I found on the internet. This was again recommended for 11-year-olds. It said here, place each of the following rainforest plants and animals in the correct column. I'm thinking, what? Hot lips. Hot lips. Can you see this, ladies and gentlemen? What is hot lips? I had no idea. Although I love the jungle, when I can, I go to the jungle, but I don't know what hot lips are. Interesting. So I checked on the internet, okay, and it said, hot lips. The hot lip plant is so called for obvious reasons. This flower invariably provokes amused giggles. Among those who first see it is also called devil's ear or oreja del diablo. Indigenous people use it for several medicinal purposes. Like many plants with red flowers, it's pollinated by hummingbirds. It's found throughout the neotropics. Highly interesting for a biologist, but for a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, no way. Yeah. So I think we need to rethink this concept. You remember my example? What color is my shirt? Color is my tie?
Yes.
Now, here we have 2 children. The teacher has just taught colors. The teacher now, those are beginners. The teacher has handed out some blank CDs. And it's a sunny day, not like today. And the teacher says to the children, go to the windows, move the CD in the sunlight, and see what colors you can see. So this is slightly different from saying, what color can you see? You see what I mean? Because it requires focusing attention, it requires working together, and it's not obvious. They really need to engage in order to be able to do that. Here's another example. So actually that's why we call those activities learn and think in Superminds. We have the children have just learned, you have to imagine this is a double page. There's a text about the importance of recycling waste, okay? And here we have these 4 rubbish bins, and it says fruit and vegetables, sorry you can't read this very well, glass, paper and card and metal. And you know how 6, 7-year-olds like stickers, okay? So they go to the appendix of the book, and in the appendix, they find little stickers that show different sorts of garbage. So old drink cans and old magazines and old empty bottles, etc., etc., etc. So now they take out those stickers and the teacher teaches them the language in order to make suggestions where to put those, and they need to make decisions, okay? And then they do they get to a thinking task and a little project. So it's a simple activity, useful language, and when you look back at my chart of thinking categories, there is actually 4 different kinds of cognitive capabilities that are activated here. Comparisons, categorizing, focusing attention, and last but not least, making decisions. Okay? This would be, Another example, I'm not going to go into that. This is an example from the area of biology, so animals and their camouflage. Or here would be an example of patterns and symmetry. This is quite nice here, I don't know how well you can see that. We teach words such as vertical stripes, diagonal stripes, horizontal stripes, spiral, and spots. And then they look at these photos here. Unfortunately, the quality of the beamer is not extremely good. They're beautiful photos. They're very beautiful photos when you look at the books. So we have a whale shark here. So we have spotted here, or spots. We have spirals here on these snails. And then interestingly, of course, some children will say diagonal stripes. But actually the stripes are not diagonal, they just look diagonal because the fish is like this. You see what I mean? So it requires thinking, and you will get children who immediately say diagonal stripes. No, they're not diagonal stripes, they're vertical, they're horizontal stripes, etc. Okay. Now let's have a look a little bit, very briefly, at what is critical thinking, okay? Critical thinking, first of all, is working out whether we believe what we see or hear. So we're now talking the next level of thinking in a way, okay? Finding out whether something is true, arguing one's case, something that is very important for children, okay? Sometimes when I come to a class of teenagers, for example, and I say, do you like this? And they say, yeah, yes. And I say, why? They say, because I like it. You see what I mean? Learning to argue, learning to give reasons, learning to be a bit finer with our argumentation, that is something that is very important. The next one, extremely important, identifying, knowing when we don't know enough. And finally, if we don't know enough, knowing where to look for the information. Of course, the answer these days is the internet. But we also know that the internet is not only a mountain of information, it's a mountain of garbage too. So they need to learn, and here we go back to this first thing, they need to learn to decide whether what they actually read and see is really true or is possibly true. So learning to be critical is something that is very, very important. Now, many people say, well, we cannot begin this before students are teenagers. It's not quite true. Think, for example, of two things here, identifying when we, of one thing here, identifying when we need more information. That's very important, knowing when something is missing. Now let's have a look at this page from Superminds. It's a skills page, so children's reading skills are required. And I will read it out to you because I'm sure you can't all read it back there. Children read that, and they have birthday parties in our garden. See you on Sunday. Tim, dear Oliver, please come to my birthday party on Saturday. Can you bring your running shoes? We'll have a race. Mum says, don't bring your dog, sorry. The party starts at 3 o'clock. See you on Saturday. Tara, dear Linda, please come to my birthday party. Can you please bring your Purple Pumpkin CDs and your High Five CD. Please ask your brother to come too. Jamie wants to play football with him. The party is at my grandma's house, 16 Station Road. It starts at 4 o'clock. See you there. Emma. Okay. Text number 1. What's missing? Number 2. What's missing? The place. Okay. And here, what's missing? The day, exactly. Right, so, normally what we do at the end of a reading task like this is we do a true-false, we do a match scenting halves, we do answer the following questions, and I have nothing against those exercise types. We have them in our books too. But occasionally, with a reading task, we have something that requires and activates thinking, actually. And this is good because it helps students to notice important things. I must not forget about the time, the place, the day, etc. Okay? And then write an invitation to your party. Remember to write where it is, what day it is, what time it is. That goes automatical now. They don't even need to be reminded because they have explored that themselves and they have looked into that themselves. Okay? Now, these are examples of critical thinking skills for teenagers. How many of you are teachers of teenagers? Okay, right. I'm not going to go into them because obviously today we're talking about young learners, children in primary school, but I will show you where on my website, if you want, you can download those activities for free, of course. If you have teenagers, you can use them in your teenage classrooms, okay? There's several, this is just an example. There's a handout with quite a few activities actually for the teenage class. This is a beautiful picture of mine, isn't it? When you go to my website, it's herbertpuchta.com. I will show you the website at the end. Then you click on resources, yeah? Then you get to this kind of page, and you have lots of resources actually, videos where I give short talks about teaching children, teaching young learners, teaching very young learners, teaching teenagers, teaching adults. You will find articles and interviews with me, and you also find lots of event handouts. It's currently not the first one anymore because there are others there, so you need to scroll down a bit, but it says critical thinking skills with young learners and teens. And if you go in there, you will find various kinds of activities for the teenage classroom. Okay? So, see you inside the space. The next one is value-based teaching. And as I said, I find this so important because being clever is not enough. We need to be clever and we need to have good, solid human values, moral values, in order to use our cleverness in the right way. Okay? So, very briefly, what are values? Well, values are basically criteria by which we judge whether something is good or not. Okay? Whether something is good or bad. Those are basically values. Now, there are all kinds of values, moral values, there are environmental values. Do you like my photo here? I took it myself. These are swallow-tailed bee eaters. I took this in the Kalahari Desert in South Africa. Democratic values, health values, very important of course. Okay, the question is, how can we teach values? Well, the problem is that modals are very important in the foreign language class, but they don't work when it comes to teaching values. When you say you should, you mustn't, you have to, don't, etc., etc., etc. With children, this creates almost the opposite, okay? When I say to my 5-year-old little grandson, don't do that, he does it, okay? It's almost like they only hear do that, okay? It's like if I said to you now, I don't want you to think of a red apple now. You cannot not. Because our brain often works in polarities, and children's and teenagers' brains also work in polarities. So, say you have to, you ought to, you should, you can't, doesn't always work, unfortunately. They are tempted to try the forbidden, as we know. That is always tempting in life, isn't it? So how can we teach values? What can we do to actually convey values to the next generation, so to speak? Well, I mean, let's think of our traditions. There is two ways, basically. Models don't work. The first way is giving them a good model. So models work, models don't. In other words, if I want my children, just to give one example, to be friendly with other people, I need to model that. They need to see from the relevant others, which are parents and teachers, obviously, they need to see what it's like to be friendly with other people. If I'm always grumpy and angry, and I say to them, I want you to be friendly all the time, that's not gonna work. It's like if I said to my students now, okay now, everybody now, sit down please, I want you to be absolutely quiet, and I want you to listen, I want you to sit still. It's not gonna work, because my language is sit still. But what is more powerful is my body language, okay? And that suggests, don't sit still, and it's not gonna work, okay? So a congruent model, the teacher who wants to teach students to listen actively needs to be an active listener herself. And the other thing is something that's been used in all countries and all cultures for centuries and centuries and centuries and centuries, is stories. Stories are a way of conveying important values to the next generation. Unfortunately, many children these days don't hear stories anymore and don't get opportunities to read stories. And stories, ladies and gentlemen, are extremely important. And when I say stories, of course, I mean a certain quality. This is from a very interesting book. It's called Wired for Story, written by a woman called Lisa Kron. She says the brain is wired for stories. And she says stories allow us to stimulate intense experiences without actually having to live through them. In other words, in stories we encounter situations as if they were real, and we can think about those situations, we can become engaged, but we don't really need to be there, okay? This was a matter of life and death back in Stone Age, okay? Think of this, you know? 5 people do you know what it was like in Neanderthal times? Sitting around the fireplace in the cave, eating a big piece of, I don't know, meat of some sorts, okay? And then one of them says, I would like some dessert. And somebody else says, okay, I'll come along with you. Let's go and pick some berries. There are some bushes down there by the river. Let's go and pick some berries there. And they leave, and they go out, and they don't come back for about 5 hours. And the others already know something has happened. And then one of them comes back, and he tells them that their friend was eaten by this terrible beast. Because as they walked round the corner, they heard something in the bushes, some noise, and they were curious, and they went close. Well, unfortunately, it was a beast like this one here. Okay? You see what I mean? So stories had a function. Stories had a function because without stories, without telling the others, all the others would have gone there too, looking into that bush. You see what I mean? So, Lisa Kron says, this was a matter of life and death back in the Stone Age when you waited for experience to teach you that the rustling in the bushes was actually a lion looking for lunch. You would end up the main course. Okay? Now, of course, these days we don't need to be warned of lions in bushes, but stories are a way of conveying important social values. Okay? This, by the way, is another photo I took myself. Okay? This one was in Namibia, I believe. Okay. And she also says, Lisa Kron, when a story meets our brain's criteria, we relax and slip into the protagonist's skin, eager to experience what his or her struggle feels like without having to leave the comfort of home. And it's true, isn't it? We read a novel, we are so engaged, we can't put the book down, it's 1 o'clock in the morning. I know I have a busy day tomorrow, but I want to know where the story goes. I want to know if my expectations are actually met, or whether the story goes in a different direction, and then I'm disappointed or happy, depending on the content. Okay? So we have this emotional engagement again through stories. So what are the criteria that we need in stories for children to engage them? Well, let's look at a counter example. This is a bad example, okay? This is an example as we find it sometimes in course books for children. It says, read and listen to the story. And we have 2 children, Emma and Tom. Who is that woman in the photo? Tom. That's my Aunt Kathy. Emma, I see. And the man next to her, Tom, that's her husband, Craig, my uncle. Emma, and that girl, Tom, Bella, my niece, she's my aunt and my uncle's daughter. She looks nice. Yes, I like her a lot. Emma, what is it? I've got an idea. Let's eat this cake. No, I don't like cake. Cake, let's eat that chocolate, all right, but don't be greedy. Ooh. Do you see what I mean? There's nobody, there's no protagonist whose skin I would like to slip in, because it doesn't give me a chance to identify with any of the characters. It's not a story. It's, I confess I wrote this myself to give you a negative example, okay? But it's modeled very closely on something I found in a real course book. The writer, we can imagine, thought, I want to teach family words. So we have aunt, we have man, husband, uncle, girl, niece, daughter, etc., etc., etc. We have let's, we have this and that, this cake and that chocolate, etc., etc., etc. We have a lot of useful language, but no emotional engagement and no values. The only value here is don't write a story like that. Okay, so what are the criteria? What actually, how can you see when you look at a course book, for example, how can you see when you look at a story for children whether it's actually good or not? Well, children at a certain age have this kind of story thinking, which means there is no clear borderline between reality and the story. It's the child that, for example, when the teacher uses a puppet, the children know the puppet is a puppet, and at the same time, as soon as the puppet starts speaking, they go into a trance almost, because for them, the puppet is alive. Actually, a little anecdote, I was working in Paris the other day with a group of teachers, and the teacher was using one of my course books for young learners, Playway to English, and there is a puppet called Max, and the teacher came to the class and said, she said, look at Max, he's keen again. I had him in the washing machine. And then she said to me, you know what happened at that point? One girl in the class started to cry bitterly. And I said in French, in the child's mother tongue, why are you crying? And the girl said, because you had him in the washing machine. He could have died. That's what they're like, they're children, okay? So they live in a world where there's no difference between story and real life, okay? So what is that mythic understanding? What do we need? What are the ingredients for a good story for a child? We need a simple structure, beginning, a middle, and an end. We need some kind of content that cannot be explained logically. Animals that speak, children that have special powers, etc., 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 etc. We need strong emotional contrasts. Why? Because it's through strong emotional contrasts that values get conveyed. Good versus bad. If you look at your traditional fairy tales, I don't know any single Ukrainian fairy tale, but I'm sure you will find some where, for example, you have good against evil. Young versus old, huge versus tiny, generous versus greedy, etc., 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 etc. Stories, good stories for children have those contrasts, emotional contrasts, because this is where the values come out. And something, we need a problem that arises here somewhere towards the end of the beginning, and then we need something unexpected that brings that problem to a solution. I would like to show you one example here, briefly. This is for 6-year-olds.
Carrot soup.
My favorite. I'm hungry.
Leo.
Oops. Sorry.
Sausages and chips.
My favorite. I'm hungry.
Apples.
My favorite. I'm hungry.
Cakes. And ice cream. Oh, my favorite. My favorite too.
Oh no, I'm too full. My favorite.
Good story? What is the emotional contrast here? Greedy versus generous, isn't it? That's the emotional contrast, and actually what comes out as a value is sharing, isn't it? The importance to share. And children can relate to that, because they've all been, as from the age when they're very young, they've been in situations where somebody didn't want to share. So they sit in a sandbox and somebody wants to have all the toys. They've all gone through that and they can relate to it. And we don't even need to talk about it in the sense of you must share or you should or you shouldn't and you have to, etc., etc. Because it's through stories that these things work in the child's brain actually, right? Now here's another example, because of course I would like to stress the importance of reading also. I would like to stress that reading, it needs to be part of a curriculum from the beginning, not from the very beginning, because obviously they need to learn to read, but from the time when they're actually able to read, okay? So here we have this group of children who have special powers, and one of them, his name is Whisper. It's this boy here. He has the ability to talk to animals, okay? So he can communicate with animals and his friends can't. He has these sort of brain waves that he sends out to communicate with animals. We have this boy here. He is extremely strong. His name is Thunder. He can lift up big rocks and cars and what have you. We have this girl, her name is Misty. She can make herself invisible. That's her special power. And then we have Flash. She's the world's fastest runner, okay? And the stories are built around their special abilities. Or something happens, always in each of the story where a special ability somehow comes to the foreground. Now, it's the end of the school day. It was their favorite clothes day, so they did a little project. And Whisper all of a sudden realizes that his cap isn't there. He says, my cap isn't here. The girls, oh no. Are you sure? Flash says. But then Whisper realizes that Gary is actually wearing his cap. And he says, look, Gary is wearing my cap. And Flash says, sorry, Misty says, maybe Gary's got the same cap. But Whisper is already on his way, okay? He's after Gary. And we know what might happen now in real life. In real life, that's a source of conflict, okay? So he says, stop, that's my cap, Gary. And Gary says, no, it's my cap. Now, Whisper, as I said, he's a very cunning boy, a very clever boy. He has the ability to talk to animals. And there is a seagull sitting up there. He says, he communicates to the seagull, get my cap, please. And the seagull says, no problem. She stoops down, gets his cap, and Gary says, hey! But of course, too late. Whisper is very happy, thanks. So we have a contrast, happy, sad, relieved, disappointed. Only when Gary comes home, when Whisper comes home, what he sees is he is now the owner of two caps. The one he has taken away from Gary and the one he left at home the same morning, okay? So he's not the proud owner of these caps. And what children are learning now is how a problem like that needs to be solved in real life. So he actually goes back to Gary and he apologizes. He says, I'm very sorry, Gary. It's okay. Yeah? So we use those stories to bring in some of that special magic, if you like, the special powers, but at the same time there's a value message there, if you like. Let me say a few words. I'm going to finish in 3 minutes about creativity, ownership. What does that mean, ownership? Well, normally we think of ownership as something material. I own a car, I own a flat, I own a desk, a computer, a pen, etc., etc., etc. But we also own things that we produce. We own, for example, texts that we write. People own ideas. When we have a project at school and we are working with other colleagues to come up with a solution to a problem there is at school, and then I have this brilliant idea in my group, and then I notice during coffee break that another colleague who was in the same group is telling everybody about my idea as if it was his idea, then I suffer, right? Because we have ownership of our ideas. So the sense of ownership is very, very important in foreign language learning because it shows what we are able to do. It shows what we are able to do with our productive skills, okay? And I would like to quote James Zal. He's the neurobiologist who I'm currently working with. He says, creativity is one of the valued aspects of a mature mind, and images are the stuff of creativity. We conceive a new image and suddenly leads in directions we haven't imagined before. It leads to ownership, okay? Now, let's have a look at, some of you know this, if anybody's working with the lower levels of superminds, you know this kind of activity, a guided imagery activity where students, at the end of a lesson, where certain lexes and certain structures have been taught, students now listen to a suggestion from the audio and they are invited to imagine something with their eyes closed, and then they're supposed to draw and write or write something, okay? For example, this is
Close your eyes. Imagine a robot. A beautiful robot pet. Here's the head. And here are the ears.
Etc., etc., etc. I'm trying not to make you fall asleep.
And then students write their own short text. For example, my robot pet's a cat. It's got a lovely head, it's got 4 legs and a long tail, it's got big ears, it can dance, its name is RoboCat, etc., etc., etc. So students can become creative, and it's all based on their own imagination, their own thinking. Oops. Okay, good. Now, I don't have the time to go into that, but what we can see here is the importance of texts, the importance of reading. For all I have said here, reading to me is like a center skill actually, because it does require thinking, it does require many of these thinking skills also, and it develops language at the same time. Okay? So I would just like to say, yeah.
Можете підійти туди поближче.